Translator, Henyi. Editor, Henyi. Want to fight? Ling Han asked with a light laugh. By now he had already grasped the profound art of blending firmness with softness, allowing strength and gentleness to complement one another in perfect harmony. Even though Jiaming stood a whole cultivation tier above him, not the slightest trace of fear could be found within his heart. It's not a fight, but my executing you, Jiaming retorted arrogantly, his pride rising to the heavens. So what if the secret techniques that Ling Han had mastered surpassed his own? In the end, without reaching the corresponding cultivation realm, and without achieving great mastery in those secret arts, Ling Han could still be crushed beneath his heel. Then let's have a fight. Ling Han naturally had no fear of battle. Handsome little brother, what are you fighting over? At that very moment, a voice sweet and charming drifted through the air. Yet within that sweetness lurked a terrifying aura that descended without warning, pressing down upon everyone present as though a massive mountain had been laid upon their chests. Breathing became difficult, and many felt as if blood would gush from their throats at any moment. The crowd involuntarily parted to the sides. Amid the opening, a tall and slender figure with a graceful yet voluptuous form emerged into view. It was a stunning beauty, seated upright, her legs stretched casually across the body of an enormous demonic lion. That demonic lion was terrifyingly imposing. Its entire body was covered in scales resembling those of a dragon, and its fierce presence seemed capable of shaking the stars and constellations from the heavens with a single roar. In truth, it could indeed achieve such a feat, for it was an existence of the shattering void tier. The Lunar King had arrived. Who is this? Such an overwhelmingly terrifying presence. My heart feels like it's about to explode. Moreover, what an astonishing beauty. Look at that bosom, so full and overflowing that I definitely couldn't hold it with just one hand. If only I could touch it once. Pa! Someone in the crowd cast a lustful gaze toward the Lunar King and, without realizing it, spoke those lecherous thoughts aloud. In the very next instant, his head exploded violently. His headless body swayed back and forth a few times before collapsing heavily to the ground, completely dead. Seeing this scene, everyone was struck with terror. Their gazes turned toward the Lunar King, filled with deep fear. It was because she had raised her long, slender, snow-white hand, a single finger pointing toward that unfortunate man. Clearly, it was she who had killed him. The problem was not whether that person had been strong or weak. Rather, the majority of people gathered here possessed powerful backgrounds. Making such a brazen move in public, was she not afraid of inviting disaster? Only a very small number of people knew the truth. This mistress before them was in existence at the Shattering Void tier. Within this realm, she had no need to fear anyone. Furthermore, for that fool to dare utter such obscene words toward an elite of the Shattering Void tier, should he not be killed? Even if he had been a true disciple of the Heaven's Sword sect or the Absolute Saber sect, he still would have died in vain. How could an elite of the Shattering Void tier tolerate such humiliation? The Lunar King rode forward upon the demonic lion. Even Jiaming, who usually knew nothing of reverence or fear, involuntarily took several steps backward, unable to withstand the oppressive aura she radiated. His future achievements might have been another matter, but at least at present, he was completely incomparable to the Lunar King. I won't allow you to have any ideas on Hu Nu's Ling Han. Hu Nu waved the dragon fang shears fiercely as she roared toward the Lunar King. The Lunar King could not help but be slightly stunned. You actually obtained the dragon fang shears? What a rarity. Wasn't it said that it was unattainable? Even I failed to obtain it back then. Pei, if I had truly wanted it, how could I possibly have failed? Her beautiful eyes swept across the crowd as she continued. All of you must have already used the Stone of Martial Intent, I presume. Let me tell you, I once left my name inscribed upon that stone tablet, ranked 99th in the entire history of this realm. Ling Han and the others secretly snickered to themselves. At present, this master's name had already been erased from the list. The sudden rise of three monstrous geniuses, Ling Han, Hu Nu, and Jiaming, had directly forced the Lunar King's name off the rankings. Yet the Lunar King herself remained completely unaware of this fact. Seeing the strange expressions on everyone's faces, She asked suspiciously, "You don't believe me? Kitten, lead the way. Let them see my name with their own eyes." The demonic lion had already been thoroughly tamed, obedient as though it were truly a kitten. Carrying the Lunar King upon its back, it strode forward until they arrived before the stone of martial intent. With an air of pride, the Lunar King extended her finger toward the stone and declared, "Back then, only His Majesty and I made it onto the list. The other 7 kings merely managed to trigger red light. They couldn't compare with me at all. Yi, where did my name go?" She stared intently at the stone of martial intent. The 99th position was empty of her name. Even at the 100th position, she still could not find it. "After so many years, has this lousy stone malfunctioned?" she muttered to herself. "No, it has already been forced down by others." Ling Han spoke calmly. "At the beginning, I did indeed see the Lunar King's name at the 99th position." "What? Who dares to force my name off the list?" The Lunar King immediately became furious. Her gaze shot upward along the rankings as she searched. Very quickly, her eyes landed upon Jiaming's name. Instantly, killing intent burst forth from her as she snapped coldly, "Which fellow is called Jiaming?" Shua. At the same moment, everyone's gaze turned in perfect unison toward Jiaming. It was an instinctive reaction. Words spoken by an elite of the shattering void tier carried such authority that they stirred the subconscious and influenced the will of all who heard them. The Lunar King's expression instantly turned dangerous. Her fingers cracked loudly as she clenched them. "So you're the one? You dared to push my name off the list. Tell me, should I chop you into 3 pieces or 5? Jiaming's face immediately turned pale. No matter how talented he was, challenging an elite of the shattering void tier was completely beyond his capabilities. Moreover, this woman had once been listed on the stone of martial intent herself. Now that she had reached the shattering void tier, her battle prowess had nearly reached the pinnacle predicted by that stone tablet. How terrifying was that? Even if every sealed prodigy of the Earth Dragon sect appeared simultaneously, not even the strongest among them would be able to rival her. In the next instant, the Lunar King's expression darkened severely as she asked coldly, "What you mean is that I am very old already?" "Senior. Senior, your sister." The Lunar King leaped down from the back of the demonic lion and rushed straight toward Jiaming, beating him violently. With her terrifying strength, Jiaming had no ability to resist. She thoroughly suppressed him and began thrashing him mercilessly. Ling Han laughed inwardly. The Lunar King was extremely sensitive when it came to age. Even Ma Duobao, an emperor, had once been beaten by her. Yet Jiaming had actually dared to call her senior and even emphasized the difference in their ages. He had truly stabbed himself upon the sharpest edge of her spear. Jiaming felt utterly wronged. Yet he could not utter a single word of protest. The Lunar King beat him until his nose bled and his face swelled grotesquely. At this point, he had completely become a human punching bag, destined only to endure her brutal blows. Only after venting her anger somewhat did the Lunar King stop. Jiaming groaned as he clutched his face and said pitifully, "Senior, not only I have entered the rankings, Ling Han and that little girl have as well." "Senior?" The Lunar King's fury, which had just barely subsided, surged forth again like a raging tide. Which part of her looked like a senior to him? Another beating followed. Peng, peng, peng! After a violent thrashing, the Lunar King clapped her hands lightly, feeling her mind and spirit greatly refreshed. Turning her gaze toward the stone of martial intent, she said, "What positions are the 2 of you ranked at to surpass me?" Her eyes had just fallen upon the names of Ling Han and Hu Niu. They were ranked 2nd and 1st respectively. Jiaming watched from the side, the corners of his mouth curling upward into a sneer he could not suppress. He himself had ranked only 51st and had already been beaten so badly. Since those 2 ranked 1st and 2nd, could they possibly survive? "Ha! You actually forced His Majesty, that arrogant maniac, down to 3rd place." After staring blankly for a moment, the Lunar King suddenly burst into hearty laughter. "I'm going to laugh myself to death!" That fatty boasted endlessly that his battle prowess was unmatched and even shamelessly called himself first. Yet now he's been pushed down to 3rd place. Wahaha! I really want to go back and see that fatty's expression right now. I'll definitely make him lick my shoes. Well done. Translator Henyi. Editor Henyi. At this very moment, the torment within Jia Ming's heart must have surged to an immeasurable height, like a raging tide crashing endlessly against a cliff. They had all entered the rankings together, and together they had forced the Lunar King down from that list. So why was there such a vast difference in treatment? He had been beaten black and blue, yet Ling Han and Hu Nu had actually received praise in the form of a "well done"? Well done, your sister. This was utterly unjust. Yet Ling Han himself stood there in complete bewilderment as he said, "This first was actually that Fatima?" The Lunar King nodded lightly, then added, "Yes, it's precisely that fatty." However, His Majesty was not a fatty in the past. On the contrary, he was a strikingly handsome man, elegant and full of charm. If he had once lowered himself to humbly court me, perhaps even my heart would have been stirred. Every fatty possessed great potential. Ling Han could not imagine how that fatty Ma, whose horizontal width now rivaled his vertical height, had looked when he had once been slender as a lightning bolt. In truth, he did not dare to imagine it. Fatty Ma's current appearance had long since been carved deeply into his mind. No matter how hard he tried, he simply could not associate that figure with someone slim and graceful. You lot truly are impressive, to have actually forced His Majesty down the rankings. Let me tell you, that fatty's combat strength is truly terrifying. Even if we, the 8 kings, were to join forces against him, we would still not be his match. A glimmer of light flickered within the Lunar King's beautiful eyes. No wonder His Majesty holds you all in such high regard that even I feel a trace of envy. That fatty Ma was actually the holder of first place since the dawn of history. Looking at it from the current perspective, such a statement was not wrong. That was because he had already perfected the Shattering Void Tier, and it was certain that the secret techniques he had mastered had long reached the pinnacle. Those methods were far beyond anything Ling Han or Hu Nu could presently compare with. After all, he had spent countless years cultivating and tempering himself. Ling Han forcibly stopped himself from dwelling further on the image of Fatty Ma once being slender. Instead, his heart filled with deep astonishment, the number 1 since ancient times. What kind of concept was that? No, something was wrong. If Fatty Ma was truly that powerful, then why had he sealed himself in the first place? With such strength, he could have already split open the skies at that time. Sealing oneself did not increase one's strength. Even if one slept for 1,000,000 years beneath a seal, their cultivation would remain exactly the same as it had been 1,000,000 years ago. In fact, due to the distortions of time's flow, they might even age slightly. It was utterly incomprehensible. Ling Han lowered his voice slightly and asked, "Lord, what connection do you all actually have with this ancient kingdom?" Didn't you know that this ancient kingdom was called Purple Moon Kingdom?" The Lunar King replied with a laugh. Ling Han froze for a moment, then blurted out, You all established this ancient kingdom?" "Of course." The Lunar King spoke as though it were the most natural matter in the world. "Back then, His Majesty led us, the 8 great kings, to sweep across the realm and unify the entire land. The so-called 5 great sects were beaten until they were completely shattered. We even seized all of their accumulated resources, stripping them clean so they had no means left to seal away their elites. Their inheritances were broken, and they had no way to pass them down." The Lunar King burst into hearty laughter as she reminisced. "But someone among their upper ranks actually managed to endure. Then, when we awakened, that previously defeated enemy suddenly appeared lively and vigorous once again. How absurd!" She spoke without the slightest restraint, and did not lower her voice in the slightest. The people nearby heard every word clearly. At once, everyone in the vicinity was thrown into utter shock. So it turned out that this empire had once been so overwhelmingly powerful that it unified the entire realm. Even the 5 great sects had suffered crushing defeat beneath their rule, and now they were making a resurgence. No wonder their strength was so terrifying. In merely a few short months, they had already seized control of nearly half of the lands within the Middle State. The Lunar King pondered for a moment, then continued, pointing out another matter. "However, when we ruled over the realm back then, only 3,000 years had passed since the previous reckoning. Thus, the 5 great sects had not sealed away many elites. Now, the situation is completely different. Nearly 10,000 years have passed, so their sealed elites must have increased by at least twofold. Furthermore, 4 of our kings have yet to awaken, which is why we cannot annihilate them all in one stroke. Even this was already frightening enough. Only 4 kings had awakened, yet they were already so ferocious. If all 8 kings appeared together, it was indeed possible that they would once again conquer the entire realm. Moreover, Ma Duobao himself had not yet made a move, and he was a genuine elite whose battle prowess had towered above multiple generations. Ling Han pondered deeply before asking, "Why did you all seal yourselves for so long?" "The time was not right." The Lunar King shook her head slowly. "At that time, the natural environment was too poor, martial arts had not yet reached their peak, and the strength of the nation had not yet climbed to its highest level. Therefore..." She made a gesture with her hand, as though cleaving apart the heavens themselves. "Although His Majesty's battle prowess has been the strongest in all of history, even he could not compete with the heavens then. We had no choice but to seal ourselves and wait for the proper time to rise again." Now, however, it was indeed a favorable era. The martial arts environment had once again begun to flourish, and the overall strength of the realm had reached its greatest height in the past 10,000 years. Naturally, the power of the nation they could borrow would also be correspondingly stronger. Of course, they themselves still had to possess strength. If they could not defeat their enemies in one strike, then they would simply sleep again and fight another day. "From what you've said, this place belongs to you?" Ling Han asked. "Of course. Otherwise, why would you think I chased after that damned alchemy pavilion?" The Lunar King humphed coldly. "That thing that sprouted legs is actually an alchemy pavilion?" The corners of Lingan's mouth twitched slightly. After all, it was his first time witnessing a building that had grown legs and flown through the air. It was as though it had gained a life of its own. "That alchemy pavilion was forged from divine metal. In truth, it is equivalent to an alchemy furnace. Moreover, it has been endlessly nourished by the precious chi of the earth gathered by His Majesty. The longer the time, the greater its effect," the Lunar King explained. "However, because we overslept, that divine metal was nourished by the precious chi of the earth for far too long. It eventually gained sentience and could no longer recognize either myself or the Flame King." Ling Han asked probingly, "So you still did not succeed?" "No." The Lunar King was furious. "That divine metal has practically developed a life of its own. Judging by the time, it must have existed for at least 2 millennia. Being nourished day and night by the precious chi of the earth, this damned alchemy pavilion has become extremely formidable. From the looks of it, unless His Majesty personally takes action, there is probably no one in this world capable of dealing with it." Wasn't that placing Ma Duobao upon far too high a pedestal? But when he thought about it again, he was the #1 in battle prowess since ancient times. There could never be too much praise for such a person. Ling Han could not help but feel curious, and he asked, what kind of alchemy art was it? As the Alchemy Emperor, anything related to alchemy naturally drew his intense interest. "Taiji the Lunar King replied. Ling Han's expression changed immediately as he said, "That is a divine pill. High-level heaven." Grade pills were already considered divine pills. There were even some shattering void-tier cultivators who were unable to consume them because the terrifying medicinal power would cause their bodies to explode. The Taiji Star was one of the highest-grade alchemical pills among them. It could strengthen one's divine sense. But exactly how powerful that increase would be, Ling Han did not know. That was because he had never come into contact with the hierarchy of immortal grade levels. "That's right, it was originally part of our plan to consume it after successfully refining it, but unexpectedly, that damned alchemy pavilion actually dared to ignore me." The Lunar King was nearly dying of rage. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, "No need to rush. There is still a long time ahead." Even if the 5 great sects were suppressed, splitting open the heavens was easier said than done. The people of the world had to submit willingly. Otherwise, the power of the nation would become nothing more than poison. "Oh, right. Since you managed to enter the Tool Pavilion, what kind of precious tool did you obtain?" the Lunar King casually asked. Ling Han took out the Revere life sword and replied, "This weapon." The Lunar King sharply inhaled and exclaimed, "The number one killing sword has actually fallen into your hands?" And yet that fatty claimed that in this world, apart from himself, no one else could obtain that sword. "You truly are fortunate, kid. This precious weapon was personally forged by His Majesty himself. Moreover, it is unique in the entire world. Its terrifying might is beyond imagination."